What's up everybody, welcome back. So let's continue working on our camera security system. We still have plenty to do, so let's not waste any time and just dive into it. We're going to continue working on our security terminal, and we're going to add some overlap events so we can interact with it and show the UI hint. And we're also going to work on our BeginPlay. So let's get the security terminal blueprint up. And let's start with the overlap events. So I'm going to select the trigger that I created in the previous video. So just a little box trigger over here. And we're going to add the begin and end overlap events. So on the right side, we can simply add them by clicking the little plus sign. And first of all, I want to know if I'm the server or not, because only the server is going to do stuff. So let's check if we are the server. If not, we're not going to do anything, and if we are, we're going to cast the other actor to our first person character. So we're checking if this is a player or not. And if it is, we're going to set the interactable actor variable on the player to ourselves. So we created the interactable actor variable, I think, in the previous video. So that's just this variable for the interact event over here, and we're going to set it from here. So let's say set interactable actor, and we're going to set it to this blueprint. So drag off and type reference to self. And we're also going to create an array of players that are inside this trigger. So I'm going to create a new variable over here and call this all players inside trigger, or all players in trigger. And that's going to be an array of first person characters. So first person character, and make sure it's an array. And then I'm going to drag this in here and add unique. So if a new player entered the trigger, I want to know it and I want to add him to this array. So plug it into here. And now we need to call an event to show the UI hint. So we can do that from our first person character as well. If we drag off here, we could look for the UI show hint. And I think we should be good to go from here. So let me see. Now we want to create a multicast event for this. So let's get rid of this one. And we want to create an event inside our security terminal first. So we're going to create a custom event in here. And this is going to be UI show hint. And then we're also gonna create another custom event. And that's gonna be UI show all hints. And we're gonna get back to this in a little bit. So first of all, I want to get this UI show hint event out of the way. So I'm gonna get a call to this event in here. No, that's not going to work. So let's just create the variables. So we need the player character in here. That's player character, the first person character. And we want to know if the hint should be visible or not. So I'm going to say is visible. And that's going to be a boolean. So let's get a branch in here. And then if this is locally controlled, so we want to know if this pawn is locally controlled or not. We are on the server, so we're only doing things server side. We determined that over here. So we want to know if this is actually a client or the server, but if we check for that, we'll always get the server returned. So we need to check if we are locally controlled in this case. So we're going to drag off the pawn and we can get is locally controlled and plug that into the boolean, and then we can simply call the UI events. So we have our UI show interact hint and that's the one for the server. Come on. And we also have the client version, client UI show interact hint, and we're going to plug that into the false pin, and we're going to plug the visibility into this event pin over here. So we're good to go. And then for the show all hints, we're going to make it so that all players inside the trigger will have the hint enabled or disabled. So we're going to get a for each loop in here. And we're going to plug in all players in trigger. Then we're going to get a branch. And again, we want to check if we are locally controlled or not. So we can just copy it like this. And then we're going to call the UI events again. So let's copy and paste them as well. So we can plug in the target for the array element, and the visibility, we're going to create a pin over here. So that should work. And now if we go back to the overlap event, we're going to call this UI show hint event to show the hint to the player that's in the trigger. So for the player character, that's going to be this one, and visible is going to be yes. So that's the begin overlap event. And then for the end overlap, we're going to do the same in reverse. So first let's see if we are the server or not. And then let's cast to the first person character again. So if we are the first person character, we're going to set the interactable actor to nothing. So drag off your first person character, set interactable actor, and just don't connect anything up. So it's going to reset. And we're going to remove ourselves from the all player in trigger array. So drag off here and do remove item. And we want to remove ourselves, so the character in this case. And then we're going to call our UI show hint event again. And we're going to disable the hint. So just copy it and make sure it's not visible and plug in your player character. So that should be good to go over here. And now we also need to do a few things in a BeginPlay event, but we don't have that yet. So let's just go from the empty version over here. And let me double check what we're going to do in here. So first we're going to create a few variables. So I'm going to create a camera blueprint variable. So camera blueprint. And that's going to be an array of our security camera blueprints. So I'm going to look for my security camera blueprint and an array, that's fine. And this is going to be instance editable. And it doesn't need to replicate, so that's fine. Then I'm also going to create a current index. And that's simply an integer. And that's a single variable. And I also need to create a variable inside the camera blueprint. So let's get our camera blueprint up here as well. And in here I want to create the owning terminal variable. So let's call this owning terminal. And this is going to be our security terminal blueprint. Compile and save this and go back to the terminal blueprint. And now let's build the function in here. So again, first we're going to check if we are the server or not. So only the server is going to do stuff again. So is server. If we are the server, we're going to set the visibility for the active camera first. So we're going to disable all of the screen capture components, and we're going to only activate the one we want. So that's going to save us a little bit of activity. So let's get our camera blueprints in here, and let's get a copy and drag in our current index. And then we're going to set the visibility. So for the scene capture component. If we disable visibility, that means it turns off, and if we enable it, then we turn it on. So we don't set the active property, but we set the visibility property. So let's set this visibility to true, and then we are going to loop through all of the cameras that belong to this blueprint. So let's get the camera BP array in here, and let's get a for each node. And for all cameras that belong to this blueprint, we're going to set the owning terminal. So drag off here and set our owning terminal variable. Connect it to the loop body, and that's going to be our self. So that's this terminal. And after that, all we want to do is create an array of other terminals. So I'm going to get all actors of class. And I want to get all other security terminals, if there are any. And I'm going to promote this to a variable. And that's going to be all security terminals. So we have those stored as well. So I think we should be good to go over here, but we can't really test anything yet because we need an interact event. So I think we're going to do that next. First, let's do a little bit of work on the UI. So we need to create a widget blueprint so we can access and control the cameras. And we also need to set something on the security cameras, to be honest. So let's do that first. Go to the security camera, and for the scene capture component, by default, we're gonna disable visibility. So they are turned off by default. So make sure you don't forget that. And now we need a material to show when a camera is offline. So I simply created a simple image in Paint, and I'm gonna use this. So make sure you have something you can use for that as well. I'm gonna drag it in here, and I'm simply gonna create a material with this, and that's going to be my camera offline material. So cam offline material, and that should be fine. Now we need to create another one of these terminal screen materials as well. So I'm going to create a material again, and this is going to be my UI terminal screen material. Let's open it up, and for this one we don't need to add the parameter node, so I'm simply going to drag in the no, I'm not. I'm going to create a new texture render target. So let's right click materials and textures and render target. And this is the UI texture render target security cam. And this is the one I'm going to drag into the UI version. So I have a separate texture render target for the UI, and plug this into the emissive color over here. Save and close it. So this is pretty much the only limitation that I have right now. I wasn't able to get dynamic materials working on the UI, so I'm not sure if that's something I'm doing wrong or if it's not possible. So that's why I need a separate UI material, and we need to switch between them. But if we were able to create dynamic material instances, then there would be less limitations to this system. So if I'm able to figure that out, I'll get back to it. So for now, let's create a widget. I'm gonna create user interface widget blueprint, and this is going to be my terminal screen, I think. So security, let's just call it security screen widget blueprint. And this is going to be the blueprint that shows when we want to control the cameras. So let me see. First of all, I am going to drag in a border in here. So this is not going to be anything high tech. So if you're good with UI, you're probably better off making something yourself. But for now, we're going to work with something like this. So I'm just going to make it 1920 1080, anchor it to the center, and make sure it's properly aligned. Then I'm going to make sure that it's black. and maybe an alpha of 0.9, so it's a little bit transparent. And then I'm gonna add a canvas panel to this. Do I really need that? I'm not even sure. Let's just do it. So the canvas panel, I'm dragging it on top of the border, and then on top of that I'm gonna drag an image. So where image over here, and the image is going to be our camera feed. So let's rename that and make sure that it's a variable. And then we want to line our canvas panel up. So let me see. I'm gonna make it centered over here, and then for the camera feed I can set the size. So first let's get the image in here, and I want to select my UI material. So UI terminal screen material. Oh, we get this error, it's not in the UI material domain. Do we want to change it? Well, let's have it do it for us. So we can simply click the little button and we are good to go. Now I'm gonna set the size over here, so that's going to be something like, what did I use? 1080 by 720, I think. So 1080 720. And now this should be centered. So there we go. And I'm also going to add a camera name to this so we can see what camera we're looking at. So let's get a text in here as well, and I'm going to drag it onto the canvas panel. So that's why we needed the canvas panel. Let's put it up here and let's make it a little bit bigger. So I'm going to say italic and then size 20, that should be fine. So this is going to be the camera name. And let's call the variable itself camera name as well. And make sure that it's actually a variable, so select it over here on the top right. And then we should be good to go over here. So let's go into our graph, and then we want to add a few things in here. It's not too much. So first, an event to update our camera name. So let's create a custom event. And that's going to be update camera name. And we simply want to get our camera name in here and set the text. So set text for the text, and we're gonna plug him in, and we need to transform this into a name variable. So we can get to name, I think. And then we can simply drag this onto the node, so the variable will be created. And we can rename it if we want to be precise about this. So that's the camera name. And now we're also going to make a function to show our offline screen. So I'm going to call this show camera offline, custom event, show cam offline. And I'm going to add a branch in here, drag it onto the node to create a variable, and this is going to be the isOffline variable. So we want to get our camera feed in here, and if it's offline, we want to set a brush from texture. So set brush from texture, and plug this into the true pin. And for the false pin, we want to set the brush from material. So set brush from material. So let's create variables for this. So right click, promote a variable, and this one is going to be my screen capture material. And for the texture, let's do the same thing, and that's going to be my camera offline texture. So let's give these default values. So the camera offline texture is my awesome image that I created in Paint, camera offline. And for the screen capture material, that's the UI terminal screen. So these are linked up. This should be good to go. Let's make sure we enable match size. I'm not sure if it matters, but let's just do it. So we have those set up. I think we need to go back into our player controller so we can add a few functions for the UI. So inside our player controller, we do not have anything in here yet, so let's start building this up. But first we need a function to show our security system blueprint widget. So let's create a new function, and I'm going to call this show security screen widget blueprint. And let's build this up. So let's get a branch in here first. Drag the condition on the node, and this is going to be my isVisible condition. So do I want to hide it or do I want to show it? So if I want to show it, I may need to create it. So first let's create a widget, and let's select our terminal screen widget or our security screen widget, that's fine. So for the owning player, that's going to be ourself, so that's the player controller. I'm going to promote this to a variable, security screen widget blueprint. And first I'm going to check if it's valid or not. So if we already created it, we don't need to create it again. So is valid. And connect it up to the true pin. So if it's not valid, I want to create it. And if it's already valid, I can simply add it to the viewport. So drag in the variable and add to viewport. Connect this to the valid pin and connect this to the setter over here, and that should work. And for hiding it, we want to check if it's valid again, just to make sure. Why not? And if it's valid, we're gonna remove it from parent. So drag off here and remove from parent. Connect it to the valid pin, and then we are good to go over here. So we can get a return node in and connect them up like this. So that should work for our security screen widget. Let's compile, save, and go back to the event graph. So for clients, we need to make sure they can call the event as well, and we need to get a replicated event in there. So create a custom event and call it client show security screen. And for this, I want to make sure that we, let me see. So obviously we want to drag in the function over here and we want to connect them up, but I also did something with a variable. Let me double check real quick. So we're going to use a variable for our security terminals in here later, and for clients I'm using this function to set it. So let's get a variable in here, and that's going to be my security terminal. So that's the terminal that I'm currently interacting with. So that's going to be my terminal blueprint. Oh, come on. And I'm gonna drag a setter in here and drag it onto the node. So it creates the variable again. And for the visibility, I also want to create a variable, so drag it on here as well. And we should be good for our client function over here. We're gonna call this later, so we'll get back to it later from another blueprint. And let's create a few other functions as well. So let's create a custom event, and the first one is going to be show offline screen. And the second one is the client version, so that's going to be client show offline screen. So the client version needs to replicate to run on owning client, and the show offline screen normal version should not replicate at all, so that's fine. And then for the let me see, for the client version we're going to call our normal version, so show offline screen. And for the normal version, we're gonna drag in our blueprint widget, and we're gonna show our camera offline. So camera offline. And let's create the variables in here. So let's drag them onto the nodes. So we can show the offline screen if we want to for the host and for the clients. And now we're also going to make a function to update the camera name. So let's create a custom event and call this update camera name. And then I'm going to create a second one, and that's going to be the client version. So client update camera name. And this one needs to be set to run on owning client. And then for the normal one, we're gonna call our HUD widget, or not the HUD, but we're gonna call our widget. So drag in the widget variable security screen, and we're gonna call our update camera name function, and plug in the name over here. And from the client version, we're gonna call the normal one. So update camera name. And pass on the variable, so that should work. And for now, I think we are good to go for the player controller. So let me see. I think we need to go back to our security terminal and start working in there. But I think it's going to be better to do it in the next episode. So for now, thanks for watching, everybody. Talk to you later. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video or you think you might have learned something, please consider leaving a like. I'll be back for more.